We've been going through Luke Acts for a long old time, almost 2 years. We decided to go through Luke Acts because here at the church, it's really important to us, your leadership here at the church, that we make disciples out of you. Christ said when he left to go baptize and make disciples, teach what I taught, and I'll be with you to the end of the age. We take that real serious here, and so we decided to go through the book of Luke and the book of Acts. They're a 2-volume set. They're written by the Apostle Luke. He decided that we probably should write down what took place and why they were doing what they were doing and where the church came from. And so that's what you have when you read through Luke and through Acts. Luke is the story of Jesus from his birth, his ministry, his miracles, his teachings, his death, and his resurrection. He ascends at the end of the book of Luke, and then Acts picks up right from the ascension and goes through, now that Christ has come and done what he did and put a new system into place, a new covenant, how should we now live? And that's what you see then in the book of Acts. It's the spreading of the gospel, the making of disciples, taking Christ to the Gentile world. That is the book of Acts, and we have been going through that for a long, old time. And today is no different. Now, today's verses are super interesting if you're a history dork, because they're very history dork-ish. When you read today's verses, they also are one of those ones that if you're a skeptic about the Bible, you got to account for Acts chapter 27 because it doesn't make sense that it's there from this place. Acts 27 to this day is still a chapter that in the nautical world, when they look at ancient maritime activity, like how did they boat, how did they do the thing, this is a chapter that even secular world people will look at because it gives such an accurate description on what to do when they would face storms. There's not a lot written down about failing in the nautical world at the time, and so the secular world still will look at this, what we're going to read through and look at today when it comes to studying boating and shipping things. Which brings you then to this. If this whole thing is made up, I just listened this week to a podcast with Sam Harris, who's a known atheist, arguing why you shouldn't believe in the Bible is because the accounts of Jesus were written decades after Jesus, decades, like 20 years. They're written decades. You know, that the account for World War II, one of the main books that they used to study World War II that is considered the defining work for World War II was written in 1991. But we believe in World War II. Nobody's questioning World War II. Nobody's going, World War II didn't happen. This guy made it up. Nope, we decide to accept it. When you get to question, when the Bible says things that people don't like or it's fantastical, that when you have this historical narrative you look at, you get to say things decades after, decades, 20 whole years after the event. People are still alive. People didn't die. Like, you can't just discount all of it. And all that to said then, okay, so we wrote it decades after. Why is this? Who wrote the chapter about nautical boating? Who did we go find to make that up? Because this wouldn't have been knowledge that these guys would have had. This wouldn't have been knowledge on like how this worked and the routes that they went and where they were going and all. If it's all made up and it's all manipulated and then if it's not made up and it's not manipulated, then what an incredible lie that somebody has fabricated here to tell. Like, to go that far, that you went and found somebody, that you asked them what would happen and how would we do this and what would take place if a boat were to be lost at sea, what would they do at the time? Why do you want to know that? Well, I'm fabricating a religion. I'm making up the thing about this guy who declared himself to be God and died and rose again. When did that happen? 20 years ago. Why are you doing 20 years ago if you're making it up? Shh, be quiet. I'm writing the book. Now, we're going to go 20, and I need to know what you would do because it's going to add validity thousands of years from now when believers still believe that some fat pastor is going to stand on a stage in a country that doesn't even exist, and he's going to argue, you should believe this thing because that's there. So come on, give me the info. I got to have the manipulation. It's like it gets into the realm of conspiracy sometimes that you're going, like, why isn't it just easier to believe that this historical event took place and these guys recorded the historical event, and then we can read about the historical event, and then we have to assimilate within ourselves, do we believe this or do we not? And so today, when we look at these scriptures, keep that in mind, that you have this account that we're going to look at that is very accurate, but also conveys a deeper message about how we should behave when it comes to the storms in life, how we should act and how we should approach things. Because Paul's approach in this story is whack-jobby. It is like when you really stop and put it into context and think about how he responds to the situations he's in. This is not how a normal person would respond to what goes on. So let's jump into it. When it was decided that we should sail from Italy. Now remember last week we left with Paul tried to convert Agrippa. He tried to convert the king at the time to Christianity. The king got frustrated and left and said if he wants to go to Caesar, then send him to Caesar. And that's what Paul wants. God's promised Paul, you're going to Rome. And so here we finally are headed to Rome. When it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adamantium, made that word up, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. So who's with Paul here? Well, this Aristarchus guy. And who else? Luke, right? Because he says we. This is the first spot in this story. This is a little weird. Paul's a prisoner of Rome. So think about in the modern world. Like if we had some prisoner as a country, some enemy of the state, who you're taking to Washington. Can you, like, how did Paul pitch, hey, I know you're footing the bill to take me out of Caesarea all the way to Rome. But have you met my two friends? Because this is Luke. He's writing a book about me. You'll read it someday, promise. And this is Aristarchus, and he has his dumb name. So these two would like to travel along with us and jump on board. And there seems to be no kickback from that. Like, yep, that seems to be just fine. What this shows us is Rome doesn't know how to deal with Paul. They just, like, we're at the place now, like Agrippa said, if you hadn't appealed to Caesar, I would have let you go because I don't know what to do, but you did, so now I'm sending you to Rome. And so then you get to these legionnaires. The legionnaires, Rome historically is incredible with military leadership, not so good with political leadership. So the people they put in power for politics tend to be like, insane. The people who are in military leadership tend to be like super pragmatic, super like good dudes. Everything is black and white. So it makes sense then when this guy shows up and Paul's like, yeah, I got these guys, that he looks down and he goes, you don't even have a charge. Like, we don't even know why you're, sure, if they want to jump on, feel free. Now, how Roman transports worked and what they would do is they didn't have like the prison boat, right, which feels like a new Fox TV show. They didn't have, so what they would do is they would show up and say, we have X amount of prisoners. Do you have space on your ship? And then the people who are there would go, well, yeah, we do. And they go, okay, well, then we will pay you X amount of money for the use of the extra space on your ship. So it was a way for people that were doing trade route stuff anyway to make extra cash. It was popular. Everybody did it, so that's what's going on. So then you go on. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly, gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. Again, weird. Putting out to sea, there we sailed under the lee of Cyprus. A lee, because none of us are nautical, and if you are, I don't mean to offend you. So when the wind is blowing away from land, that's called windward. When it's blowing towards land, that's called leeward. So when it says we put in at the lee, that means that they found where the wind was blowing towards the land of Cyprus. They did that because they are not going into open water. Like at this point in the nautical world, people did not sail into open water. That was a death sentence. You didn't know what was out there. The water was super deep. If your boat sunk, you were dead. So they would get just off of the coast of things, and they would sail that way. And so that's what they're doing here. I have a map. We pull my map up. So they're down there in the corner by Damascus. They're going straight up. Now, they're going to Rome, which is up over there by the Three Taverns. Put that on there in case anybody's thirsty. But so they're like, logically, it seems like you would just go, right? We just go across the Mediterranean and go to Rome. That's not, they went straight north. So then they went up and around the island. So that is where they are at. Because the winds were against us. So they would sail on the lee side if they had bad winds because the boats didn't do well if they didn't catch a good wind. And that way, if they did get blown off course, they got blown into land and not out to sea. When we sailed across the open sea, along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy, and they put us on board of that. So it's not going well. This has not been an easy trip so far. They haven't caught wind. So you're just sitting on a boat with it not moving, going like, this is awful. When they get to where they get to, up to Myra, then they find a ship out of Alexandria. Alexandria is in Egypt. What they would do is Rome could not grow enough grain to feed its people, so it had a trade agreement with Egypt to buy grain. So Egypt, they would grow it in Egypt, and then they would take it up this trade route into Rome and back and forth, and they had these giant barge-like ships that they would move grain around with. They were really long, kind of wide. The unique thing about them is they had no rudder. So they were flat-bottomed like a barge, and then they had two big oars that would stand off the back that they would either push all the way into the bottom of the water and push along the bottom of the whatever sea they were in to try to move, or they would wag it to try to get the thing to go forward. But it was wind-driven, so they had the sail on it. So historically, these things are incredibly slow, but they are very safe because they're big, flat-bottomed. So they didn't normally, you didn't find them tipped over or that kind of thing. But they also were not breaking any land speed records, and they could haul a lot of people. Now we know when they get onto this, they tell us way later, but I'll tell you now. There's 276 people on the boat. So 276 people get on this grain boat, and now we're headed towards Rome. Getting onto that boat is not probably what they wanted to do. Their hope would have been the little boat that they got on in Caesarea would have been able to whip up with the wind and get to Rome in a couple weeks and be done. But they're going way slower than that, and they're in the end of the season, and so they're like, well, it's probably going to be safer if we get on to that boat. Which for us this morning, what I want us to think about is this. I think sometimes there is a mindset inside of Christianity that says, if I'm in God's will, then whatever I'm doing will be easy. Right? Like, have you ever had somebody go, well, I feel like I'm supposed to be doing this, but when I try to go do it, it's been really hard. Well, maybe that's God closing a door. Maybe that's what that is. I want to challenge you with this today. Sometimes we equate our personal comfort as a barometer for God's will for your life. But the problem is when you look at Christianity, nothing inside of Christianity seems to lend itself to that. Jesus, the guy we're supposed to be like, who was and is God, who came to earth and showed us how to live, he himself said, I don't have a place to lay my head. I don't know where my next meal is going to come from. He came to redeem the Jews. The Jews rejected him and killed him. That's not really like a happy-go-lucky, everything is comfortable and wonderful type of story. Paul has been beaten. Paul says in Corinthians, 3 times I was shipwrecked and lost at sea once and floated around for a day and a half before somebody found me. His life's not been a big rainbow and everything's perfect and everything's wonderful. We need to realize that sometimes when you make a declaration of faith and God tells you that you're going somewhere, that doesn't mean that it's going to be all rainbows and donuts on your way. That you may face pain and you may face suffering. And what we will see today and what we will look at is this. This world is a storm. This world is a broken mess. And when you go play in a storm, you're going to run into broken mess. And so it's not so much about what do we do when that happens. What we should stop and think about, and the example Paul gives us, is when you know God's promise for your life, God's promise, Paul, you're going to Rome, that no matter what trial and tribulation Paul goes through, his mindset is never, God has forgotten me, or God has left me here, which should challenge all of us in today. Do you know God's voice? Because if you know God's voice, then it can add a lot of peace and hope in situations that feel hopeless, because you know God's told you where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And even though you can look at your surroundings and go, this isn't working the way that I thought it was going to work, it doesn't mean that God's forgotten you. It just means God's doing it his own way, and you're along for the ride. Remember, Christianity is a game of submission. That's not the world we live in. Nobody likes to submit to anything, right? Nobody's going to tell me what to do, how to live, how to act. And if you make me question anything, then you're an evil bigot, and I hate you. America. But the truth of the matter is, what Christ says is that you have free will. You have the ability to choose. And what I'm calling you to do is say to choose me. And when you choose me, then that means you won't choose other things that maybe the world says is okay, but it's not going to be okay. And I'm doing that because I've caught you in the storm. I've reached out into this broken, dark world, and I've grabbed hold of you. And I've given you hope and given you reason, and now you have to exist in the storm. Well, people who know there's hope in the storm act differently than people who don't. You don't think that's true? Listen to where the story goes. We sailed slowly, sounds like fun, for a number of days, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. As the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmon. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Haven, near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So they start sailing. They get to Crete. They get to this little city called Fair Haven. Fair Haven sounds like a trailer park, and essentially that's what it was. There was not a lot there, little bitty harbor, boring little coastal city. Paul goes, hey, we're past the day of fasting. Well, what's that? That's Yom Kippur. We're past the Day of Atonement, which means it's either late September, early October, depending on which lunar calendar you want to work back through to get there. So in this area, the Adriatic Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, it's common knowledge to this day, you don't sail on either of those seas in the winter. They're choppy. They're not safe. You don't want to be, so we don't sail on those things. So when Paul goes, excuse me, sirs, maybe we should not sail because I think if we do, it's going to be of great loss, not just of your cargo, not just of the money that you value here, but literally of yourself. We should just stay here. He's either doing that prophetically or he's just doing it because he's sailed and been in shipwrecks before, and he's like, I don't want to be floating in the middle of the sea in the winter because you people don't want to stay in the trailer park town. It's not that bad. We'll just pony up here and we'll wait it out, which was common at the time. And they're like, well, the boat's really big and it's bigger than the harbor, and when the winter comes, the waters get choppy and the boat may hit the bottom, so let's try to get up to Phoenix. How do you think Paul must have felt at that? Right? God called me to Rome. God told me this is where I'm supposed to go. It's what I'm going to do. This is going to be, God's leading me there. And now I know if we don't stay here, things aren't going to go well, and these people aren't listening to me, but I'm a prisoner and I have to go where they're leading me. This seems like the moment to me that if I'm Paul, I get a little frustrated with God. Right? You called me to do this, God, and you led me here to do this, and now it's not easy. Why isn't it easy? Why are you making this easier for me? Why won't these people listen? Why won't they do what I want them to do? Why? That is infantile behavior. Jonathan does this all the time to me, and I want to teach him in a proper manner. Jay will come to me all the time and go, Dad, could I have a donut? No, you already had a donut. Why? Or you take them to the grocery store. Taking children to the grocery store should be a prison sentence unto itself. And you walk down the aisle and you know you've gone in, and I do men's shopping. I don't do women's shopping. I don't want to go in there and meander around. Like I have a list, I buy the things on the list, I leave. I hate shopping, I don't want to be there. So, but both of my children, if you go, everything can we have this? Can we have, Dad, can we get cinnamon raisin bread? No. Can we get cinnamon bread? No. Can we get raisin bread? No. Can we get apple raisin? Stop asking me questions! Why? But don't we kind of do the same thing with God? Hey, I want you to take a stand in this world, and I want you to live a life that's separate from the way the world lives. Well, why? Why would you make me this way with these feelings and then tell me I can't act upon them? Why are you doing this to me, God? Why would you lead me out here to lead this thing or to do this thing and then not make it be the most super successful thing of all time that everybody looks at me and tells me how great I am? Your personal comfort is not a barometer for God's will or God's love for you. This world is suffering, but take heart, my children, I have overcome the world, is what Jesus said. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun. Sometimes the world's going to be just like this story. You're going to be on a big old flat boat that's not designed to be in open water, and you're going to be telling everybody around you, if we go out there, we're going to die, and the world's going to look at you and go, let's go and be happy about it. Verse 13, now when the south wind blew gently, supposing they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon, a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. It's funny they translate that northeaster. The Greek actually there means wind and waves. And the ship was caught and could not face the wind, and we gave way to it and were driven along. Put that map back up. So here's what happens. They go. So you're down there at Crete, that little island straight south there of Athens. See where where it says Fairhaven, and then the arrow points out to sea. See, they wanted to go up and around to Phoenix. They just wanted to go up and park. As soon as they got around the edge of land where they had wind blowing, it just caught the boat and whipped it out to sea. And you don't go in open water, remember? That's not what you're supposed to do. And how do they respond? When the ship was caught and we couldn't turn it into the wind, we just gave way to it and went where it took us. Doesn't boating sound fun in the ancient Near East? Doesn't this, like reading, there's very few things in life that like make my stomach like roll in and go like this seems, but this is like the idea of drowning seems terrible to me, burning alive, like those type, this is one of those moments. Like to stop and think about, we are on this thing on open water, we're trying to go that way, and it's so windy and so out of control that our response was just to pull the oars up and ride it out into the Mediterranean Sea. Like, the next stop is North Africa. Like, woohoo, here we go. And the whole time, Paul had to be like, well, buckle in, I told you. Right? Like, Paul's just sitting there looking like a smug idiot, like, where do you think this is going to end? Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. This is how you know Luke wrote it, because he says we, meaning he did it, so he's quite proud of himself that he like, this doesn't need to be in here, I don't think, but he's like, we did it. We secured the ship's small boat, which is the dinghy. They got the dinghy up on the big boat, like, we got to save the dinghy, and Luke did it. After hoisting it up, they used support to undergird the ship. Then, fearing they would run aground on the citrus, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. So now they don't have a sail. Like, now we're just a big flat plank with 276 people sitting on top of it, with a bunch of grain in the bottom of it, with a big pole up out of the middle of it, and we're in the middle of this windy storm going like, we're having fun. This is great. Things are working out just how we hoped that it would. And then it gets worse. How can it get worse than that? Since we were violently storm-tossed, they begin the next day to jettison the cargo. So that's the thing that gives the ship any value at all. If they make the contract with Rome that they'll deliver X amount of weight, if they're short any amount at all, Rome doesn't pay them. So now, like, this is starting to change the mindset of the people on board. We're not so much worried about making a buck. We're just worried about survival. So they just start throwing stuff. Why do they do that? Because the more weight in a boat, the lower it sits in the water. The bigger the storm, the bigger the waves. That means that when the waves are really high, where the wave is really low, you're closer to the bottom of the sea. So when your boat goes down, it can literally crash on rocks and knock a big hole in the bottom of your boat and then shoot you way back up in the sky on top of some giant wave as your boat fills with water and you scream to the sky, "Why, God, have you forsaken me?" So they're just throwing stuff off in hopes of staying light enough that they don't hit the bottom. On the third day, this is when it gets wild. The third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. What's the tackle? That's all the ropes, all the oars, all the sails, anything to literally control the ship. They're like, we don't need that anymore. Like, we're done. We're not even pretending we're a boat anymore. We're just throw all that weight over because that has less value than Jim. So we'll keep Jim, we'll throw the ropes, and we'll hope that we survive this mess. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. You can feel the hopelessness in Luke's writing. Imagine how terrifying that is. You leave land, right? The boat, like you look behind you and there goes Crete. Well, there's Crete. I can sort of see it. Now I can't. All around you is just water. And not like, ooh, this is pretty ocean water. This is nice. We should sing a song. No, like ocean where you have like 40-foot swells. Where like it's a wall of water and you're in a big flat boat and normally you want to turn so that you can ride the wave right, but you can't turn it because you threw all your tackle over. So you're just floating out there in the middle of nowhere. And then the only way you have of guiding yourself in the ancient Near East is the stars. So the only way to know where you are is by the sky, which is now covered in dark clouds because you're in a storm, so you have no idea where you are. We might hit Africa. We might not. We're just floating in the middle of the Mediterranean. And it goes on long enough that he says they gave up the idea of even being saved. So think about how awful that must feel. You're lost in the storm, you're lost in darkness, and you've completely given up any hope of salvation, and you're just floating out here waiting to die. That's the world. That's the world we live in. Listen, if Jesus came and died and resurrected for the forgiveness of sin and gives us hope out of death, then essentially what people are is lost in a storm. This world is lost like they're lost. Just out in the middle of nowhere, no idea how to get anywhere they're supposed to be, no way to save themselves without any hope or any direction. Just lost in darkness. Like, wow, where do we go? What do we do? How do we live? How do we act? And then the world just like grasps at straw. Like maybe if we get a lot of money, or maybe if we have a lot of sexual experience, or maybe if we know the right people, maybe if we get political power, maybe if we do these things, then that somehow will give us purpose and meaning out here. But the truth of the matter is you're just covering your eyes and pretending like you're not lost in a storm. You're still marching towards death. You can put a bow on it, but you're still going to die. People go, well then why would God call me and it not be easy? Because God calls you to go out into that and find Him. Like we want to think sometimes, well, the church should exist, that you should have a big old building, and you should build it, and it should be like a country club, and you should have coffee bars, and you should have great music, and you should have pretty people, and you should get them all in there, and people should be here and like, ooh, it feels nice here. I feel comfortable. Are you comfortable? I feel so comfortable. They've clearly had a meeting on what to eat and what to wear and how to dress and how to look, and then we sort of think like the people who are lost at sea that are out in the darkness are somehow going to hear about it and be like, oh, I should wander into there. They've got the answer. They're going to fix it. That's not how we're supposed to work. God said, do what? Go into the world. He didn't say, build a place that everybody looks at and wants to be a part of. He said, go into the world, baptize in my name, and make disciples. Why? Because people are lost. They don't have it all figured out, and then you got to convince them that your way's better. They are lost in darkness. I can guarantee in this story that there were people on that boat who had ideas. Well, maybe if we aim the boat that way, or maybe if we aim the boat this way, maybe we should pray to this God, maybe we should pray to that God, maybe we should do and all of that stuff eventually leads you to the place when none of that works, you end up where you go, there is no hope and all is abandoned, there's no salvation. Which is the world we live in, right? Like you see people who get everything they want. They get like we all have like, if my life was like Kim Kardashian, it would be the best. She has all the money in the world and she smokes show and everything. And you're like, she's miserable. She's not happy. They're not happy people. Watch them. Listen to them talk. Well, if I just do this, or if I just get that, or if I just, they don't know what they're doing. We have an answer. We have hope. And it's not you. right? They don't want you to drive your boat up alongside them and been like, I bet you feel stupid. The only people who can call people out of the storm is who? Jesus. How do I know that? Listen to how Paul responds. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, which could be one of my favorite lines in Acts. Since they'd been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them. He says, men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail for Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Look, they didn't just grab him and throw him overboard. Yet. Now I urge you to take heart. There'll be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I'm worshipped. And he said, don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that I will be exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on some island. So Paul goes, you should have listened and we wouldn't be here, but you didn't listen, so that's okay. But take heart, because the God I love and the God I serve is going to save me, and because he's going to save me, he's going to save you too. What a testimony for ministry. You pull up next to those that are lost in the dark, and you go, you shouldn't have come out here, and you knew you shouldn't have come out here, but you did. But don't worry. God has a plan. Now, you may be out here and you may think there's no way. There's no way God can take me out of this storm I've put myself in. There's no way that God can redeem this mess I've made in my life. There's no hope. There's no way I can ever get back to where there's any sort of semblance of humanity or life. Like, you don't understand. I am so lost. And Paul says what? Nope. God has a plan. The boat's going to go away. It's going to be rough, but you will live. You will survive. That's salvation. It's against all odds. Right? Like Pastor Pat, free from Christianity and religion, is a dirtbag. If you didn't know that, now you do. Like the things I think and the things that run through my head, the desires I have, they don't glorify Christ. But I submit those to his will because I want to be like him. And then the beauty of the cross is his Holy Spirit allows me to be a thing that I'm not capable of being without him. It's the same as this story. When people show up in the midst of the storm and say there's hope in the darkness, you don't have to be this thing that you are, the only way that happens is what? God. The only way this story even works or even makes sense is God. Period. They are floating in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea with no control of the boat. They're trying to go to Italy. When you read the commentaries about this, if you get into the liberal commentaries, it's hilarious because if you don't know, they're going to shipwreck. We're going to get there in a minute, and they're going to shipwreck off the southern part of Italy. And when you read the commentaries, you're like, this story might not be real because the odds of them landing within 100 miles of where they wanted to land is astronomical. No, it's not. God's driving the boat. God's driving. He told Paul, I'm taking you to Rome. Come hell or high water. And Paul goes, really? And he goes, yeah, and I'm not kidding about the high water. Like, get ready. It's going to be a show. It ain't going to be easy. It's not going to be a simple walk, but I'm going to get you there. Promise. So when you're lost in the middle of the ocean and you don't know how you're going to find it and you don't know where you're going to go and God's promised you something and you're looking at your life going, I don't know how this, so like, just shut up and go, I don't know, but he's going to do it. He's going to do it. He always does. You go on in the scripture, when the 14th night had come, 14 days after, floating in the middle of the ocean, Paul, you guys shouldn't have, but hey, he's going to save us. Imagine how people are like, is this guy insane? Like, here we are 2 weeks later. As we're being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. So by taking a sounding, they would tie a rock to a rope that was marked in fathoms. They would drop it into the water until it hit the bottom, and then they would go, 20, good. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. So if it was 20, then it's 15. That means they're headed up towards land. Fearing they might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for the day to come. As the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boats into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and they let it go. How many of you have lived that life? That life gets so crazy and so out of control that the only thing you can do is just stop and petrify yourself and go, "I don't know what to do, but I'm just staying right here. Maybe if I don't move, nobody can get me." Like, that's what they do. The boat, they're coming up on land. They can't drive it. They can't control it. The only hope that they have is to drop the anchors and hold it into one place in the middle of the storm. We'll just hold it here and hope this works. It's so rough, the other sailors are like, "Put the dinghy in the water and we'll try to make way that way." And Paul's like, "There's no dinghy for you. We're going to ride this thing out. I told you, if we all stay on the boat, all 276 of us will live. But it's not going to be an easy ride." So they cut the rope. You want to beat the storm? You got to rely on Jesus, period. You can't rely on Jesus till it gets easy and then try to figure out your own way. You can't take a little bit of Christianity, put it in your life, and call it good. You're either all in or you're not. 2 steps out of hell is still in hell. You got to make a decision. Are you going to follow Christ or are you not? Are you going to go all in on hope and freedom from your storm, or are you going to try to just figure it out yourself on how to live and how to act, and when it gets really rough, then you'll be like, "Oh, Jesus, help me, save me," or not? And if you're saved and you're out in the storm, how far out are you willing to go? As far as God takes you. If you're out looking for those who are lost, you're trying to find those who don't. Like, you go where God tells you to go, and you let God lead you where He wants you to lead you. You don't meander around. You don't try to find something that's comfortable, because your personal comfort is not a barometer for God's love or God's will. It's going to put you into places that don't feel safe. And in those moments, are you able, like Paul, to go, "Don't get on that boat. Don't take the easy way out. Don't think that's going to work, because it's not. You get on that boat, you're going to die. Stay on this boat. We're going to wreck, but we'll live." As the day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you've continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you, take some food, for it's going to give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." When he said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. And then they were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they'd eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out all the wheat into the sea. So now they've thrown everything out of the boat except people. The only thing that's left is people and the boat. Now, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, and at the same time, loosening the ropes that tied the rudders, they, hoisting the foresails to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow struck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks and on pieces of the ship. And so it was, they were all brought safely to land. So they take this big old boat. They take the one rudder that they chained to the side of the thing in case they ever saw land again. They jam it into the rocks beneath them, and they just drive the thing right up on a reef. When they get it up on the reef, the front of the boat is all right, but the rear of the boat is getting beat to heck by the ocean and the water behind them. At which point, the Roman guard goes, "We got to kill these prisoners, because if the prisoners escape, we face the punishment that they face, so they all have to die." But the centurion, who has some integrity, goes, knowing Paul was there, is like, "No, we're not going to kill anybody, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Paul. If it wasn't for Paul's God and whatever is taking place here in this weird mess, like, so nobody's dying. If you can swim, swim. Otherwise, grab pieces of the boat and float, and hopefully we'll get you." And all 276 of them make it to the island of Malta. Which, if you look at the map again, pull that map. So there they are, floating out randomly. That little arrow there where they take the weird hook, that's Malta. If they'd have been 20 miles to the north, they'd have missed the island completely. If they'd have been 20 miles to the south, missed it completely. And would have hit Africa, maybe. It's a miracle they all survive. Unheard of that they are able to get to where they get. They have no stars to guide them. They don't have any way to steer or direct the ship. They're literally just riding a storm. Welcome to church. That should be the definition of how the church exists in this world. We ride the storm. This world is a storm. It's a mess of people who are grasping and seeking anything they can find to be happy and to be complete. We will latch on to anything but the God who created us to try to find purpose and meaning in this world. We're going to be enlightened. We're going to be smart. We're going to be logic. We're reason. We know this. We know that. We've got it all figured out. We know how to live. We know how to act. And you're nothing more than a ship lost at sea with no direction and no idea where you're going or what you're doing. You're just saying words and hope somebody will listen. But we serve the God who created the storms. We serve a God who can grab hold of the boat in the middle of the sea and can steer the thing right into the island. You're going here, Paul. Like a child just wrecking it on the rocks. You lived. How many of us have had those situations that feel like there's no way God can redeem us, no way God can be in the midst of this, that when you get on the other side of it, you go, oh, okay, God, I see what you did. I see where you were in the midst of this. I see what you had for me now that I can look back at what I've come through. You never left me. You never forsaked me. You didn't leave me out there in darkness. It was in those darkest of times that I really began to trust and rely on you. We threw all the food over the side. We threw all our ability to navigate over the side. The only thing we had left to rely on was what? You. Each and every person in this room, where you will get to that place in life. You will get in a place in life that you will seek the things you think that you have to have. You'll go after the stuff you think you need. And at some point, God will reduce it down to the only thing that you can really rely on is me. And will you rely or will you not? It's why here at Vintage we're so hardcore about creating disciples, because it's in that moment that I want you to have had enough teaching and enough training and enough understanding of the Word that you can make a decision that's based on sound thought and sound process, that you don't just go, I don't know who you are and I don't know what you're saying and I think that this is weird, that you go, no, there literally is a historical narrative of this thing. There is a recording we can look at. There is centuries of church that has existed that shouldn't have existed. There are people who have lived and died for this thing. There are story after story after story of people who were lost in the storm, that were lost at sea, that nobody thought would ever come back from where they were, that God saw fit to grab out of darkness and breathe life into and make a new thing so that they could go out into the world. The problem is we cannot be a church that when God takes you and slams you into Malta, that you just build a home and sit down and don't go back out. Because there are still brothers and sisters in this world who are lost at that sea, that are lost in the storm and in the darkness, that need you to come alongside them and say, there is hope found in the cross of Jesus Christ. The only purpose that you have, the only reason that you exist is to know the God who created you. You are a creation. He is the creator, and those things are to be into symbiosis together, to live and to exist so that you can know God and God can know you. And if you sever that relationship, if you remove that from that, then essentially you're lowering your sails, you're cutting your anchors, and you're just floating off into darkness. And God could leave you out there. God could say, hey, I'm saving Paul, but the rest of you idiots, we warned you at Crete. Don't go out there, and you win anyway. So you can reap what you sow. Go die at sea. Paul, get on and we'll get you where we need you to go. But the rest of these guys, they earned it. But God doesn't do that. God is a good and loving God who cares about people. And He knows that through this, others will find salvation because they'll see the power of Paul's God on full display. What do you think those guys said when they got to Malta? We'll find out next week. But what do you think happened? Like, you guys will not believe this. We left Crete. We came around the corner. We were going to go to Phoenix, to the party town. When we came around the corner, we got hit with the biggest wind we've ever seen in the history of winds. It blew us out in the middle of the sea. We floated out there for 30 days, just floating, just floating around. And not easy floating. It wasn't happy floating. It was storm. We're puking. Everybody's sick. There's no food. We don't know what we're going to do. 14 days into it, this psycho over here, the weird little Jewish guy, he stands up and he goes, I told you shouldn't come, but my God appeared to me. That's what he said. I don't know. Appeared to me last night. And he said, the angel said to him that they were going to live and we were going to hit an island. We're in the middle of nowhere. No islands. I'm like, this dude's nuts. We're going to hit an island. How are we going to hit an island? What's he talking about? That's what he said. And then he just nonchalantly said, don't worry, everybody will live, but the ship will die. And then just sits down. That's what he said. That's what he did. I couldn't believe it. And then we just floated out there for 14 more days. And we were all like, this dude's nuts. And then we hit an island. And I looked over at him, and he's just like, told you. Like, old boy never got freaked out. He never got scared. At one point, he was like, hey, we should eat some bread because we're about to hit the island I told you about. And we're like, there's nothing. What are you talking about? Faith. That's Christianity. That's why Christians can stand in the face of drug addicts and say, you don't have to be this thing. That's why Christians will stand in the face of oppressors and rapists and murderers and the people that the world looks at and says there's no place for you and go, hey, God loves you and He's got a plan. That's why Christians will stand in the face of people that the world has completely rejected and said we had nothing to do with you and go, we'll take you because God's got a plan. You're just lost in the storm now. We just need to find an island to wreck you into. That's all. We need to find some bulwark we can chain you to so you can get your garbage together. But you got a purpose. You got a plan. You got a reason. You've lost track of everything important because you've gone into survival mode because you're lost in darkness. We just need to bring you back over here. When people who are lost experience people who aren't, they become a new thing. Which is why we cannot be comfortable sitting on our rear ends. We have to be willing to go into the world and be the light to it. So let's go be that church. Let's pray. Lord, I come to you this morning, and I thank you for the challenge that we have in Paul's shipwreck story about faith. Lord, I thank you that you have given us proper instruction and proper direction on understanding what personal comfort is. Lord, help us all to be comfortable in being uncomfortable. Lord, help us to find a new place to be content. That in the midst of the storm that is this world, we can find a place to exist and to think and to reason. Lord, I pray that you would help us to make disciples, to train people, to teach people on why they should be a follower of you. And then, Lord, I pray for every circle represented in this room. Every person who is in here, the circle of influence they have, the people that they come in contact with in this world, the people who are around them, who are lost in darkness. Lord, I pray that these people who are represented here today would be a representation to those people. That their life and their actions, the way they carry themselves, the way they behave, would cause people around them to say, why do you act like that? Why do you behave like that? How can you stand up in the middle of a storm and say, hey, it's not going to be a big deal, we're going to hit an island when there's nothing around us to hit? Lord, let us be people who are led and guided totally by you and not by the things of this world. God, we know that there's a myriad of things out there to distract us and lead us away for what it is that you have for us. But Lord, I pray you would use each and every one of us in this room to be your hands, your feet, and your light in this world. Help us not to be lazy or complacent, but use us to reach people who are lost. And for those who are lost and in darkness, Lord, I pray today would be a reckoning for them. That in the midst of their storm, in the midst of the things they think they have control over, that God, you would begin to reveal yourself to them in a mighty way. That you'd begin to speak into their hearts and into their minds and call them out of darkness. Give them a community to bind themselves to. Give them a place to call home. Lord, that they can become your disciples so that they can go reach others who are lost at sea. Again, God, we thank you for what it is that you've accomplished. We thank you that throughout history you've had your hands on your church and on your people. You've never left us. You've never forsaken us. You always have a plan and you always have a will for our lives and where we're to go and what we're to do. Lord, we embrace suffering, we embrace those things, and we pray that you would use us as you want us to be used. It's in your gracious name we pray. Amen.